Good morning and welcome back for episode 70, reading the Anarchist Handbook, organized by Michael Malice for about 10 minutes a day. And we are in chapter 19. It is Thursday, August 5th, 2021, and we're reading from David Friedman from The Machinery of Freedom, 1973 and 2014. And we're toward the top of page 273, and we'll just go ahead and start reading. The problem would be simpler if it could be subdivided. Groups much smaller than our present population might be able to create defense organizations and finance them voluntarily. It would be in their interest to do so if such groups could defend themselves. Once such organizations existed, hundreds of them could combine, via unanimous contracts, to defend areas of national or even continental size. One could imagine an alternate history in which, as military technology developed, such voluntary arrangements evolved, just as coercive governments evolved in our history. But in the present world, small groups cannot defend themselves. They, therefore, have no incentive to develop voluntary arrangements to finance defense. A solution to the problem of developing institutions that provide defense without the state, paradoxically enough, might be provided by the state itself. Suppose that over the next 50 or 100 years, private institutions gradually take over all governmental functions except defense. The state, without control of local institutions, might find the cost of collecting taxes substantial and be tempted to raise money in the manner of the French monarchy, by selling tax exemptions. It could offer to exempt any community from taxation in exchange for either a capital sum or an annual payment. Such a tax exemption would itself be a public good, defense via bribery from one's own state. For the community. Since the collection costs of taxation are high, the value of a tax exemption is greater than its cost. The members of the community might therefore find it in their interest to set up an organization designed to pay off the state. It can be financed voluntarily by one of the ways of financing public goods that I have described. It would probably pay an annual fee instead of a lump sum in order to make sure the state stayed bought. Over a period of time, many or most communities develop such institutions. There then exists a group of organizations voluntarily funded either by the interest on a capital endowment or by contractual agreements to pay on the part of members of the community and charged with the task of defending their communities. These organizations could then contract with each other to take over from the existing state the job of financing and providing national defense. So one solution to the problem of national defense might be the development for some related purpose of local defense organizations. These must be organizations permanently endowed for the purpose of providing defense. They cannot be simply local firms with an interest in the protection of their territory, since such firms, having agreed to pay part of the cost of national defense, would be driven out of business by new competitors who had not. This is the problem with Morris and Linda Tannenhill's idea of financing national defense through an insurance company or companies which would insure customers against injury by foreign states and finance national defense out of the money saved by defending their customers. Such an insurance company, in order to pay the cost of defense, would have to charge rates substantially higher than the real risk, given the existence of its defense system, justified. Since people living in the geographical area defended would be protected whether or not they were insured by that particular company, it would be in their interest either not to be insured or to be insured by a company that did not have to bear the burden of paying for defense and could therefore charge lower rates. The National Defense Insurance Company would lose all its customers and go bankrupt, just as it would if it was simply selling national defense directly to individual customers who would be defended whether or not they paid. The same difficulty occurs with Ayn Rand's suggestion of financing national defense by having the government charge for a use of its courts. In order to raise money for defense, such a government must either charge more than competing private court systems or provide a worse product. Such private courts, if permitted, would therefore drive the government out of the court business, depriving it of its source of income. Miss Rand apparently expects her government to have a monopoly of the court and protection business. But if the government does not use coercion to keep out competitors, there is no obvious reason why the sorts of institutions described earlier in this section should not arise. If the government does claim special rights that it does not give to private courts and rights enforcement agencies, for instance, the right of policemen to make mistakes and not be responsible for the damages done, or the right of government courts to subpoena witnesses, then it becomes a government in my sense of the term. Miss Rand uses a different definition: an agency of legitimized coercion. Either the things the government does but forbids its competitors from doing are coercion, in which case it is coercing private citizens, or they are not coercion, in which case it coerces the private rights enforcement agencies by forbidding them to do the same non-coercive things. Either way, Rand's government must be coercive in order to work. So it is not a solution to the libertarians' problem of providing national defense without coercion. Although local defense organizations must be endowed, they might evolve in ways other than those I have described. For instance, existing insurance companies would receive a capital windfall at the time an adequate national protection system was first constructed. Since outstanding policies that had been sold at high rates under high-risk conditions could be paid off under low-risk conditions, they could use this windfall, which comes only from the policies already written and thus represents only the small part of the benefit of defense which accrues in the near future to those already insured, to endow national defense. Such an endowment would not be sufficient to pay all the costs of national defense, unless it becomes far cheaper than it now is, but it might cover some of them. There are other ways that part of the cost might be paid. Charities exist for the purpose of financing public goods. They currently collect billions of dollars a year. There is no reason why national defense should not be partly financed by charitable contributions. Historically, it has been. In time of war, people often donate money, labor, and weapons and purchase war bonds for more than their market value. There is another common way of financing public goods that is intermediate between normal economic methods and charity. The best example is the institution of tipping. Customers at a restaurant leave a tip even if they have no intention of eating there again, and therefore no personal interest in rewarding good service. The rewarding of good service is a public good. If everyone does it, everyone will benefit by the improved service. But if I do it at a restaurant where I rarely eat, most of the benefit goes to the other people who use the restaurant. I tip partly because I realize this and view good restaurant service as a desirable goal. In effect, a worthy object of charity. A more important reason is that I feel I ought to tip. An internal feeling of obligation or external social pressure make me act according to a sort of implicit contract, an obligation to reward the waiter if he does a good job, even though I know that there is nothing forcing me to do so and that I will suffer no material loss if I do not. Similarly, if national defense were financed voluntarily, people would give money not as a matter of charity, but because they felt that they were receiving something and ought to pay for it. As with tipping, the amount received might have some connection with how good a job they thought was being done. And, like tipping, people might feel obligated to give something, even if the job were only barely satisfactory. However bad the service, few of us have the temerity to leave no tip at all. How much are people willing to pay on such a basis? I do not know, but one way of getting a rough idea is by seeing how much they pay in tips under circumstances where they receive no direct benefit by tipping well. This is usually the case with taxis, since few of us expect to get the same driver twice. But only sometimes with restaurants, since many customers go to the same restaurant regularly. Taxi tips total about $150 million a year. All sorts of tips combined total about $2 billion. Such figures suggest that individual feelings of obligation, reinforced by social pressure, might provide a substantial fraction of the cost of defending against foreign enemies, a service most of us regard as more important than keeping up the quality of restaurant service. Although national defense is primarily a public good, there are parts of it which can be sold separately to individuals or groups. Foreign states would probably treat a national defense agency as a government with respect to such matters as passports and extradition treaties. It could get some income by selling passports, arranging to extradite criminals from foreign countries at the request of local rights enforcement agencies and similar enterprises. In addition, there would be some areas which a national defense agency would have the option of defending or not defending. Hawaii, to take an extreme example, could be excluded from the nuclear umbrella covering the mainland. Communities on the edge of the defended area, although necessarily protected from nuclear attack by any national defense system, could be defended or not defended against conventional attack. A national defense agency could go into these areas and inform those individuals and corporations who had the most to gain by being defended, large landholders, insurance agencies, and the like, that they would have to pay a price for defense. In all of these ways, a national defense agency might raise enough money to finance national defense without taxation. Obviously, a system that depends on local agencies evolved for a different purpose, or a ramshackle system financed by charity, passport sales, and threats to Hawaiian insurance companies, is economically very imperfect. So is a system financed by coercion and run by government. These arguments suggest that it may be possible to defend against foreign nations by voluntary means. They do not prove that it will be. I am only balancing one imperfect system against another and trying to guess which will work better. What if the balance goes the other way? What will I do if, when all other functions of our government have been abolished, I conclude that there is no effective way to defend against aggressive foreign governments save by national defense financed by taxes? Financed, in other words, by money taken by force from the taxpayers. In such a situation, I would not try to abolish that last vestige of government. I do not like paying taxes, but I would rather pay them to Washington than to Moscow. The rates are lower. I would still regard the government as a criminal organization, but one which was, by a freak of fate, temporarily useful. It would be like a gang of bandits who, while occasionally robbing the villages in their territory, serve to keep off other and more rapacious gangs. I do not approve of any government, but I will tolerate one so long as the only other choice is another and worse government. Meanwhile, I would do my best to develop voluntary institutions that might eventually take over the business of defense. That is what I meant when I said, near the beginning of this book, that I thought all government functions were divided into two classes, those we could do away with today and those we hope to be able to do away with tomorrow. And we'll wrap that up, a little bit long today, toward the bottom of page 277. Again, be back soon reading about 10 minutes a day from the Anarchist Handbook organized by Michael Malice. If you have not bought a physical copy, I'd get one. You never know how long it'll still be available.